The one, you ever have one of those moments where life just smacks you in the face with the kind of drama you'd expect only in movies, and you're left standing there, blinking, wondering if this is really happening? That was me when I found out my daughter, my own 17-year-old girl, was told she couldn't attend my sister's wedding because she was too young. I know. It sounds absolutely ridiculous, doesn't it? 17 is barely even considered a child anymore. She's on the cusp of adulthood, preparing for college, already mature enough to handle responsibilities that some 30-year-olds can't. And yet, according to my sister, her own niece didn't make the cut for the adult-only guest list. At first, when I heard those words, I thought it was a joke, like some strange attempt at humor, because how on earth could a bride exclude her teenage niece from one of the most important family events of her life? But no, my sister wasn't joking. She was dead serious. And the more I tried to wrap my head around it, the more baffling it became. Because let me tell you, my daughter is not some little kid who throws tantrums in public or can't sit still through a ceremony. She's an honor student, incredibly polite, already has a part-time job, and frankly carries herself with more grace and maturity than half the adults I know. So, hearing that she was too young was like a slap in the face, not just to her, but to me as her mother. And you know what? That was just the beginning of a family drama that would spiral into something I could have never imagined. It wasn't just about the invitation, it was about the principle. The way my sister seemed to place her own shallow standards above the bonds of family, and the way she underestimated what I was willing to do when someone hurts my child. Because if there's one thing you need to know about me, it's that I can forgive an insult aimed at me, but the moment you hurt my daughter, the gloves come off. Now, to understand the weight of this situation, you need to know a little about my sister and our family dynamics. Growing up, she was always the one who craved the spotlight. The golden child, the drama queen, the one who could turn the smallest family dinner into a Broadway production just by the way she made everything about herself. Don't get me wrong, I love her. She's my sister after all. But let's just say she has a way of making things far more complicated than they need to be. So when she got engaged, none of us were surprised when it turned into this big spectacle. You'd think she was marrying royalty with the way she carried on. Custom invitations that looked like something out of a luxury magazine, a venue that probably cost more than some people's homes, a dress that she bragged about being one of a kind. Every single detail was curated for maximum attention, maximum aesthetic, and maximum drama. And honestly, I didn't mind. It was her wedding, her day, and if she wanted to pour her life savings into it, then so be it. But where things crossed the line for me was when her obsession with control and perfect appearances bled into insulting my daughter, because that's exactly what it was, an insult. You see, my daughter isn't just my kid, she's my best friend in so many ways. We talk about everything, her dreams, her crushes, her anxieties about the future, and we share a bond that's unshakable. So when she came to me one night, eyes red from crying, and whispered, "Mom, Aunt Sarah said I'm not invited because I'm too young," I felt this rush of anger course through me that I can't even fully describe. My baby girl was humiliated. She felt unwanted, like she didn't belong in her own family, and that broke something inside me. Because it wasn't just about missing a party. It was about being told she wasn't good enough to stand beside her family on a day that was supposed to be about unity. And when you mess with my daughter's sense of belonging, trust me, you awaken a side of me that even my sister didn't see coming. Of course, when I confronted Sarah about it, she had her usual smug tone, the one she uses when she thinks she's being rational, but is really just flexing her ego. "It's an adult-only event," she said, flipping her hair as if that explained everything. I stared at her, waiting for her to realize how absurd that sounded. Adult, only. She's 17. That's practically an adult. But Sarah was unmoved. She went on about how there would be alcohol, how the vibe she wanted was sophisticated and elegant, and how she couldn't risk having kids there who might ruin the atmosphere. I couldn't believe my ears. The irony is that several of our cousins, who are only 19 or 20, were invited without question. So apparently, the magical cutoff between being an unwelcome child and a worthy adult, in her mind, was the difference of a year or two. I asked her point blank if this was really about age or if it was about something else. Maybe jealousy, maybe her desire to keep the spotlight fully on herself without my daughter, who, by the way, is stunning and turns heads without even trying. Sarah's face tightened at that, and she brushed me off, muttering something about sticking to her guest list. And that's when I knew. It wasn't about rules or atmosphere. It was about control. She wanted to control every single detail, even if it meant stomping on the feelings of her own niece. And I promised myself right then that I wouldn't let her get away with it. But here's the thing about teenagers, they're resilient in ways that sometimes even adults aren't. My daughter, bless her heart, tried to put on a brave face. She told me it was fine, that she didn't even want to go, that she'd rather hang out with her friends that night anyway. But I could see right through her. She wanted to be there. She wanted to see her aunt get married, to be part of the family celebration, to dance and laugh and take pictures with her cousins. She wanted to feel included, and no matter how hard she tried to hide it, the rejection stung. Watching her sit on her bed, scrolling through social media, pretending not to care while her shoulders sagged with disappointment, that image stuck with me. That was the moment I realized that as her mom, it was my job to not just comfort her, but to act. To show her that when life tries to exclude you unfairly, you don't just sit back and take it. You stand up, you fight, and you show the world that your worth isn't defined by someone else's shallow standards. And so the plan began to form in my mind. I wasn't going to let my sister get away with this ridiculous power play. She thought banning my daughter would be the end of the story, but in reality, it was just the beginning. And trust me when I say, the move I made next turned her entire wedding upside down in a way she never saw coming. The night after that heated conversation with my sister, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with a cocktail of anger, disbelief, and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe determination, maybe defiance, maybe just that primal instinct a mother feels when her child has been wronged. You see, it wasn't only the rejection itself that stung, it was the smug way Sarah dismissed me, as though my daughter was nothing more than an inconvenience to her vision of a perfect wedding. The audacity of it gnawed at me, the arrogance with which she wielded her so-called rules that seemed to bend for others but snap harshly in my daughter's face. I thought about all the years I'd spent defending Sarah, making excuses for her drama, smoothing over her outbursts with family so they wouldn't hold grudges. I had been the peacemaker, the one who reminded everyone. That's just how she is. She doesn't mean harm. But now it was different. She meant harm, whether she admitted it or not. She inflicted humiliation on a 17-year-old girl who adored her, and for what? To keep her wedding free of the supposed blemish of youth. I clenched my fists under the blanket and promised myself that this was the last time I would ever allow her to hurt my child. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was about respect, dignity, and making sure my daughter knew that her worth wasn't determined by anyone else's shallow rules. As I lay there, I kept replaying the look on my daughter's face when she broke the news to me. That trembling smile she tried to force, the way her eyes brimmed with unshaded tears, the way her voice wavered when she said she didn't care. I knew she cared. She had grown up idolizing her aunt. Sarah was the glamorous one in the family, the one who always had exciting stories about travel, shopping sprees, and parties. My daughter used to try on Sarah's old jewelry whenever she came over, pretending she was part of that sparkling world. She looked up to her, admired her, even though I warned her time and again that Sarah could be self-absorbed. And now, the very person she admired had slammed the door in her face. That kind of betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from someone you love. I thought about the ripple effect this rejection would have, not just on my daughter's confidence, but on the bond she had with the family. What would it say about our values if we just accepted this? What kind of message would I send if I let her exclusion go unchallenged? No, I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let my daughter believe she was disposable, that she was some kind of afterthought in a family that should have celebrated her. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how absurd the whole situation was. Here we were, a family that had always prided itself on sticking together through thick and thin, now tearing at the seams because my sister wanted to play gatekeeper at her wedding. And the hypocrisy of it burned. Because this wasn't even about children in general. If Sarah had truly wanted a child-free wedding, fine. I could have accepted that even if it hurt. But she hadn't. She'd made exceptions. Our cousin's 19-year-old son was on the guest list. Our uncle's 20-year-old daughter, too. The difference between them and my daughter. 2 measly years. 2 years that, in Sarah's eyes, apparently marked the line between worthy guest and unworthy child. It was laughable, really, that she thought she could justify it with some nonsense about sophistication. I wanted to shake her and shout, "Do you even hear yourself?" But shouting wouldn't solve anything. I needed something smarter, sharper, something that would expose her hypocrisy without turning the entire family against me. That's when the idea began to take shape, a small spark at first, then growing into something bolder, something that made my heart race with both fear and excitement. I wasn't just going to let my daughter sit at home while the rest of us celebrated. No, I was going to make sure Sarah regretted underestimating us. If she wanted her wedding to be a flawless performance, I would show her that perfection is an illusion, that her cruelty had consequences she couldn't control. And maybe, just maybe, I'd remind the rest of the family that dignity and fairness matter more than appearances. But before I could put any plan into action, I had to deal with my daughter's feelings. She was hurting, and she needed me to be strong. So the next morning, I sat on the edge of her bed and told her something I meant with every fiber of my being. You are worth more than any invitation. You don't need anyone's approval to shine. She smiled faintly, but I could see she didn't believe me fully. And that's when I knew words weren't enough this time. Actions would speak louder. And my actions would leave a mark my sister would never forget. A 3. When the wedding week finally rolled around, the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on, and I could feel every ounce of it pressing against me as I tried to go about my day like nothing was wrong. Family members were calling, texting, buzzing with excitement about dresses and tuxedos, hair appointments and last-minute errands, and every message that lit up my phone felt like salt rubbed into an already raw wound. My daughter kept her head down, burying herself in schoolwork and pretending not to care, but I could see through the act. Every time she glanced at the calendar hanging in the kitchen, her lips would tighten ever so slightly, and I knew she was thinking about the one event she wasn't welcome at, the one party that should have included her by default. I kept telling myself I had to stay calm, that there was still time to figure out how to handle this. But inside me a storm was brewing, one that grew louder and angrier with each passing hour. I wanted to scream every time someone mentioned Sarah's perfect wedding. Because, to me, perfection built on cruelty wasn't perfection at all. It was poison dressed up in glitter. And I wasn't about to let my daughter swallow it. The family group chat was a minefield. Everyone shared their excitement, from pictures of floral arrangements to jokes about who would cry first at the altar, and I sat there scrolling, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Then came the message that pushed me over the edge. Sarah herself sent a long, gushing update about how she couldn't wait to see all her favorite people together under one roof. All her favorite people. Except my daughter. The words made my chest burn, because how dare she pretend this was some grand unifying event when she'd intentionally left out someone who should have been at the heart of it. I typed out a response more than once, my thumbs flying over the screen, crafting and deleting, because I wanted to lash out, to expose her hypocrisy right there for the whole family to see. But then I stopped myself. No, that would be too easy for her. She'd spin it, play the victim, make it seem like I was the unreasonable one. That was Sarah's specialty. Twisting the narrative until she came out looking like the misunderstood princess. If I was going to strike, I had to do it in a way she couldn't dodge. I had to make sure the truth shone through so clearly that nobody could deny it. Meanwhile, my daughter tried to act as though the weekend was just another few days. She made plans with friends, pretended to be excited about going out for ice cream or seeing a movie, but I noticed the way she lingered when we drove past the bridal shop downtown. How her gaze lingered on the white gowns in the window. How she quickly looked away before I could comment. She was hurting, and every time I saw that quiet pain etched across her face, it fueled me even more. I realized that this wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about what kind of example I wanted to set as a mother. Did I want my daughter to remember this as the time she was cast aside and her mom did nothing? Or did I want her to remember it as the moment she learned that when the world tries to silence you, you push back? The answer was obvious. And so, with each day closer to the wedding, my plan crystallized. I wasn't going to sit back and let Sarah dictate the story. If she thought she could write my daughter out of this chapter, she had another thing coming. The night before the wedding, the house was eerily quiet. Most of the family was already gathered near the venue, a fancy estate a few hours away, and the group chat was buzzing with pictures of rehearsal dinners, smiling cousins, champagne toasts, and laughter. I stared at those pictures, my daughter sitting beside me on the couch, and I could see the way her shoulders curled inward, as if she were trying to make herself smaller, invisible, as if pretending not to exist would make the hurt sting less. I reached over, took her hand, and said softly, "I know you're pretending it's fine, but it's not fine, and I promise you, you will not be forgotten tomorrow." She looked at me with confusion, maybe even a flicker of hope, but she didn't press. She knew I had something brewing, but she trusted me enough not to ask. That trust filled me with determination. I kissed her forehead, tucked her in early, and then I sat alone in the living room long into the night, plotting exactly how I was going to turn Sarah's carefully crafted fairy tale into the reality check she desperately needed. 4. The morning of the wedding arrived, and with it came a heaviness in the air that clung to me like humidity before a storm. I woke up early, far earlier than I needed to, my mind buzzing with all the emotions I'd been bottling up for weeks. Anger at Sarah, sadness for my daughter, but also an odd sort of calm that comes when you know exactly what you're about to do. The sun was barely up, casting pale gold across the kitchen counters, and I sat there with a cup of coffee that I barely tasted, staring out the window, as if the universe might give me one last sign that I was doing the right thing. None came, and maybe that was the sign itself, that sometimes we're not given answers, we just have to write them ourselves. Upstairs, I could hear my daughter stirring, moving quietly as if she didn't want to wake me, still assuming she'd spend the day at home, watching TV or going out with friends while the rest of the family dressed up and smiled for cameras. The thought made my stomach twist. No, I told myself, that wasn't going to happen. Not today. I walked upstairs and knocked lightly on her door before stepping in. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, scrolling through her phone, and when she looked up at me, there was this flicker of sadness she couldn't hide. "Morning," she said softly, trying to sound casual, but her voice cracked just enough to betray her. I sat beside her and took the phone from her hands. "Listen," I began, my voice steady but firm. "I know you think today isn't about you. I know you've convinced yourself you're on the outside. But I want you to hear me loud and clear, you are not being left behind." She frowned, confused, as if she wasn't sure what I meant, but I didn't elaborate just yet. Instead, I handed her a small garment bag I had hidden in my closet for weeks. Her eyes widened when she unzipped it and found the dress inside. A beautiful, elegant gown I'd bought for her without telling her, something simple but breathtaking, the kind of dress that could silence a room without screaming for attention. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, and for the first time in weeks I saw something flicker in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope. "Mom, what is this?" she whispered. I smiled and said, "It's your armor, and today you're going to wear it." She shook her head, half in disbelief, half in fear. "But Aunt Sarah said I'm not invited." Her voice trembled, and I could tell she was already bracing herself for disappointment, the way kids do when they've been told too many times not to expect much. I leaned closer and cupped her face in my hands. "Sweetheart, sometimes rules are made to be broken, especially when they're cruel. You've been told you don't belong, but I promise you, you belong more than anyone. And today, we're not asking for permission, we're claiming our place." She blinked at me, torn between excitement and doubt, and then slowly she nodded. That was all I needed. I knew she trusted me, even if she didn't fully understand what I had planned. By noon, we were both dressed and ready. I wore a sleek dress I'd picked out weeks ago, nothing too flashy, but enough to make me feel confident. My daughter, though, she was radiant. The gown fit her like it had been designed for her, every detail highlighting her natural grace. She looked older, more poised, and I realized with a pang of pride and sadness that my little girl wasn't little anymore. She was stepping into womanhood right before my eyes, and she deserved to be seen, to be celebrated. As we stood in front of the mirror together, I told her, "No matter what happens today, remember this moment. Remember how strong and beautiful you are." She smiled faintly, and though I could still sense her nerves, there was also a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. That glimmer was everything. We drove to the venue in near silence, both of us lost in thought. The estate loomed in the distance, sprawling and opulent, the kind of place Sarah had always fantasized about. Cars lined the driveway, guests in suits and gowns spilling out onto the manicured lawns, laughter and chatter floating through the air. My daughter squeezed my hand as we parked, and I squeezed back, silently promising her that we were walking into this together. As we approached the entrance, heads turned, and I could feel the weight of curious eyes on us. Some smiled in recognition, others looked puzzled, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the way my daughter held her chin just a little higher, the way she stepped forward with quiet dignity. She was ready, and so was I. 5? The moment we stepped through the grand double doors of the estate, it felt as though time slowed down. The music, the laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, it all dulled into the background, replaced by the thunderous pounding of my heart. My daughter gripped my hand tightly, her palm warm against mine, and I could feel the tension radiating from her small frame as dozens of heads turned in our direction. It wasn't dramatic at first, Not some cinematic hush falling over the crowd, but rather a ripple of curiosity, guests whispered to one another, eyes darting between us as though trying to solve a puzzle. Why was she here? Hadn't they all heard from Sarah that the wedding was strictly adult, only? I caught fragments of murmurs as we passed, as that her niece. But she's 17. She wasn't on the list, was she? My daughter's cheeks flushed with nervous color, and for a second I feared she might crumble under the weight of all those stares. But then she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and walked with me as though she had every right to be there, which, of course, she did. My heart swelled with pride. She wasn't just enduring this moment, she was owning it. We hadn't made it 10 steps inside when Sarah spotted us. She stood across the room, radiant in her white gown, surrounded by bridesmaids and gushing relatives. At first, she didn't register who we were. She was too caught up in basking in the attention, smiling for photos, throwing her head back in that exaggerated laugh she always used when she wanted everyone to notice her. But then her gaze fell on us, and in an instant, her smile froze, her eyes narrowing like daggers. The transformation was almost comical, like watching a stage actress forget her lines mid-performance. She excused herself from the cluster of admirers and marched toward us, her heels clicking furiously against the polished floor. I braced myself for the storm. "Are you out of your mind?" She hissed the moment she reached us, her voice low but dripping with venom. She looked me up and down with disdain, before turning her glare on my daughter. "I told you she wasn't invited. What the hell do you think you're doing?" For a split second, I felt the old, familiar urge to shrink back, to placate her, to keep the peace the way I always had in the past. But that urge vanished the moment I saw my daughter's hand tremble slightly in mine. No, not this time. I lifted my chin and met Sarah's glare head-on. "We're here because this is her family too," I said evenly, my voice carrying just enough to be heard by the curious guests gathering nearby. "You don't get to erase her just because it doesn't fit your picture, perfect fantasy." Sarah's face flushed scarlet, her nostrils flaring as she struggled to maintain her composure. She was caught off guard by my defiance, not used to me challenging her so openly. "This is my wedding," she snapped, her voice rising slightly. "I set the rules, and you're disrespecting me in front of everyone." Around us, whispers grew louder, guests watching intently, some clearly uncomfortable with the tension brewing so publicly. I glanced around and realized this was exactly the opening I needed. If Sarah wanted to make this a spectacle, then a spectacle it would be, one she couldn't control. I squeezed my daughter's hand and spoke loudly enough for the room to hear. "Respect goes both ways, Sarah. You've spent months planning every tiny detail to make this day perfect, but perfection means nothing if it comes at the expense of kindness. She is 17, not a child, and she deserves to be here as much as anyone else. If you think excluding your own niece makes this wedding better, then maybe you need to rethink what marriage and family really mean." A hush fell over the immediate circle of people who'd gathered, eyes darting between me and Sarah like they were watching the climax of a play. My daughter stood silently beside me, her expression torn between fear and awe, but I could feel her pulse steadying, her confidence slowly catching fire from my words. 6, after that confrontation in the middle of the venue, there was no going back. I knew I had crossed a line with Sarah, one I could never uncross, but instead of fear or regret, all I felt was a surge of clarity, a sense of liberation that had been building inside me for years. For so long I had tiptoed around her moods, swallowed my words, and let her dictate the tone of every family gathering. But standing there, my daughter's trembling hand in mine, I realized I wasn't just fighting for her right to be at that wedding. I was fighting for every time Sarah had made us feel small, every time she had wielded control like a weapon. And that realization filled me with a strength I didn't even know I had. The stares from the guests no longer intimidated me. In fact, they fueled me. Let them watch. Let them see who Sarah really was beneath all the glitter and lace. Sarah, of course, wasn't about to back down easily. She forced a laugh, brittle and sharp, the kind of laugh she used when she wanted to pretend nothing was wrong while her entire body screamed otherwise. "Well, isn't this charming?" she said, loud enough for her audience. "My sister trying to hijack my wedding day with her theatrics. You've always had a flair for drama, haven't you?" Her attempt at flipping the narrative was transparent, and I could see a few guests exchange uneasy glances, no longer entirely sure which side they should be on. I didn't bother responding to her jab. Instead, I leaned down to whisper in my daughter's ear. "Hold your head high. Don't let her see you flinch." She nodded, swallowing hard, and I felt her grip tighten with determination. The ceremony was about to begin, and the wedding planner, A frazzled woman with a clipboard clutched to her chest rushed over, clearly torn between trying to keep the event on schedule and diffusing the tension radiating between Sarah and me. "Ladies, please," she whispered urgently. "Guests are waiting. Let's not make a scene." Sarah glared at me one last time before plastering on her fake smile and sweeping back toward her bridesmaids, her dress trailing dramatically behind her. I exhaled slowly, knowing this battle wasn't over, but silently celebrating the small victory of not backing down. My daughter and I found seats near the middle rows, drawing a few surprised looks but no outright objections. The fact that no one dared to escort us out was proof enough that Sarah's so-called rule was crumbling under scrutiny. As the ceremony began, I watched my daughter more than the couple at the altar. She sat tall, her eyes shining, and for the first time in weeks, she looked like she belonged. Every time the officiant spoke about love, commitment, and family, I saw her lips twitch into the faintest smile, as though she was silently reclaiming those words for herself. And I knew right then that no matter what Sarah tried next, she had already lost the power she once held over us. My daughter wasn't invisible anymore. She was part of this story, and everyone in that room could see it. So 7, by the time the reception rolled around, I thought the worst of it might be over, but I should have known better. Sarah was never the type to let something go quietly. The ceremony itself had passed in a haze of forced smiles and tense glances, and while she managed to keep her composure at the altar, I could see the fury simmering in her eyes whenever they flicked in my direction. My daughter, on the other hand, seemed to glow more with each passing moment. Sitting there among family, laughing softly at inside jokes whispered by her cousins, she looked like she belonged. Because she did belong, no amount of my sister's gatekeeping could erase that truth, and that realization gave me the strength to prepare for the storm I knew was still coming. The reception hall was a glittering spectacle, chandeliers casting golden light over tables draped in silk, waiters gliding gracefully with trays of champagne, a live band filling the air with elegant melodies. Everything about it screamed Sarah's obsession with appearances, with creating a fantasy world where she was the queen at the center. But as I watched her sweep into the room on her new husband's arm, basking in the applause, I couldn't help but think how fragile that fantasy really was, how easily it could crack when faced with the raw truth she was so desperate to hide. Served, and conversations flowed. Guests clinked glasses, complimented the decor, and took pictures for social media, but beneath it all there was an undercurrent, a tension that lingered just out of sight. People had seen the confrontation earlier, they had witnessed the awkwardness, and though no one spoke of it outright, I could sense the curiosity brewing. They wanted to know what it meant, why Sarah had reacted so strongly to her own niece's presence. I caught snippets of murmured questions at nearby tables, glances thrown our way when they thought we weren't looking. And though part of me worried about the gossip, another part of me relished it. Let them wonder. Let them question Sarah's choices. The more people saw the cracks in her perfect image, the more she would be forced to face the consequences of her cruelty. My daughter, blissfully unaware of most of this, was too busy chatting with a cousin her age, laughing about something silly. Watching her smile, hearing that genuine joy in her voice again, it made every ounce of tension worth it. But then came the speeches, and that was where Sarah made her move. One by one, family members and friends stood at the microphone offering toasts filled with love and well wishes. The room was warm with laughter and nostalgia, stories about how Sarah and her new husband met, how they'd grown, how today marked the beginning of something beautiful. I clapped politely through each one, though my eyes never left Sarah. I could feel it in my bones. She was waiting for her turn, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back. And sure enough, when she finally took the microphone, she delivered the kind of speech that was less about love and more about performance. She thanked everyone for being there. She praised the beauty of the venue. She gushed about her dress. And then, she pivoted. "Family is everything to me," she said with a sugary smile, her voice carrying easily across the room. "That's why I wanted this day to be surrounded by those who truly understand what love, maturity, and commitment mean." Her eyes flicked toward our table, subtle enough that most might miss it, but sharp enough that I felt the sting. It was a veiled jab, a reminder to everyone that she considered my daughter too young, too immature to belong. My stomach tightened, my hands curling into fists under the table. She thought she could humiliate us in front of everyone, disguise her cruelty as virtue, and get away with it. But not this time.